It was a typical Monday morning at the precinct. My team and I had been working through a few cold cases, hoping to find some new leads, when the phone rang. It was a call I'll never forget. A high-profile businessman had been found dead in his luxury penthouse. He was a well-known figure in the city, a man with connections to the upper echelons of power. The case had all the makings of a media frenzy, and we knew it would be all over the news by nightfall. When we arrived at the scene, something immediately felt off. There were no signs of forced entry, no blood, no obvious signs of struggle. It looked like the man had simply fallen asleep and never woken up. But my gut told me there was more to this than met the eye. The man's name was Michael Carter, a wealthy entrepreneur with a pristine public image. But as any investigator knows, what you see on the surface is rarely the whole story. As we began our initial sweep of the apartment, I noticed a few things that seemed out of place. Small, but significant details that suggested this was no ordinary death. One of those details was a glass of water on his nightstand, still half full. It wasn't just the water, though. It was the fact that his phone, his most personal device, was missing from the apartment. A man like Michael Carter didn't go anywhere without his phone, and its absence was the first clue that we weren't looking at a natural death. We started with the basics, interviewing the people closest to Carter. His business partners, his friends, and his family were all shocked, claiming they had no idea how something like this could happen. His wife, a woman with an air of cold elegance, was distraught, but something in her behavior seemed rehearsed, almost too perfect for someone who had just lost her husband. The autopsy results came back inconclusive. There was no immediate cause of death, but toxicology reports were still pending. Meanwhile, we combed through Carter's financial records, looking for any signs of trouble. At first glance, everything seemed clean. His businesses were thriving, and his personal accounts showed no unusual activity. But one thing kept nagging at me: the missing phone. Eventually, we found it. It was traced to a garbage bin in a back alley several blocks away from his penthouse. The screen was shattered, but we managed to recover some of the data, and that's when the case took a sharp turn. There were messages, dozens of them, from a contact labeled only as X. The conversations were cryptic, filled with vague references to meetings, payments, and secrets. It was clear that Carter was involved in something shady. But what? And who was this X? We tracked the phone number to a man named Alex Daniels, a mid-level businessman with a history of fraudulent schemes and under-the-table deals. He was not on our radar initially, but his name started appearing more frequently as we dug into Carter's financial dealings. There was a pattern, large sums of money being funneled through offshore accounts, with Daniels as a common link. We brought Daniels in for questioning. He was slick, the kind of guy who had been through the system before and knew how to play the game. He claimed that his business relationship with Carter was legitimate, just some standard investments, but I wasn't buying it. Daniels had a way of dodging questions, never quite giving a straight answer. Something was off. As we continued our investigation, things started to get murky. Carter's pristine public image was beginning to crumble. We discovered that he had been involved in a series of shady business deals, many of which were tied to organized crime. He had been laundering money, extorting rivals, and using his position to keep certain people in power. The deeper we dug, the more dangerous the case became. Daniels wasn't our only suspect. Carter's wife, Lydia, was quickly moving up the list. As it turned out, their marriage wasn't as perfect as it appeared. Lydia had been in contact with a high-end lawyer just days before Carter's death, and there were whispers of an impending divorce. The timing was suspicious, to say the least. But there was something else, a life insurance policy. Carter had taken out a massive policy just 6 months before his death, with Lydia as the sole beneficiary. It didn't take a seasoned investigator to see the potential motive there. But we needed more than just circumstantial evidence to pin her down. While we were tracking down leads on Lydia, the toxicology report finally came in. It was the break we needed. Carter had been poisoned, subtly, with a slow-acting toxin that mimicked the symptoms of a heart attack. The poison wasn't something you could easily find. Whoever had done this knew exactly what they were doing. We searched the penthouse again, this time with a fine-tooth comb. In the kitchen, hidden behind a stack of cookbooks, we found a small vial containing traces of the same toxin found in Carter's bloodstream. Now we had proof that this was murder. But who was behind it? Lydia? Daniels? Or someone else entirely? As the pieces of the puzzle started falling into place, a new figure entered the picture, a man named Victor Solano. He was a former business partner of Carter's who had been forced out of the company under mysterious circumstances. Solano had a grudge, and it was well known in certain circles that he and Carter had a falling out over a deal that went bad. We reached out to Solano, but he was hard to find. He had disappeared from public view years ago and was living off the grid. That didn't stop us from digging into his past, though. What we found was a man with a history of violence and a penchant for revenge. Solano had been burned by Carter, and it looked like he had the motive and the means to take him out. The problem was, we couldn't locate him. Solano had vanished, and without him, we were stuck with a lot of questions and not enough answers. Meanwhile, Daniels was getting nervous. We had been keeping tabs on him, and it was clear that he knew more than he was letting on. We decided to put pressure on him, hoping he would crack and give us something on Solano. Under the weight of our questioning, Daniels finally broke. He confessed that he had been working with Carter on a series of illegal deals, but claimed he had nothing to do with the murder. He pointed the finger squarely at Solano, saying that Carter had been trying to cut him out of the operation and that Solano had threatened to take care of him if he didn't get his share. This was the lead we needed. With Daniel's testimony, we were able to get a warrant to search Solano's last known hideout. What we found there was chilling. Hidden in the back of an old garage was a small lab, complete with vials of chemicals that matched the poison used on Carter. There were also documents linking Solano to several offshore accounts, proof that he had been laundering money through Carter's businesses. It all pointed to Solano as the mastermind behind the murder, but we still didn't have him in custody, and the more we uncovered, the more dangerous this case became. Solano wasn't just a disgruntled business partner. He was a ruthless operator with ties to organized crime, and now we were in his crosshairs. The pressure was mounting. With Solano still on the loose, we knew it was only a matter of time before things escalated. My team was working around the clock, piecing together every scrap of evidence we could find. We tapped into his old associates, hoping one of them would give up his location. Finally, we got a break. One of Solano's former partners, a low-level enforcer, tipped us off to a remote cabin in the woods where Solano had been hiding. It was a long shot, but it was all we had. We mobilized a task force and moved in, hoping to catch Solano before he could disappear for good. As we approached the cabin, the tension was palpable. This was the moment we had been waiting for, but there was no telling how Solano would react. We moved in cautiously, surrounding the place and preparing for the worst. The cabin was old, isolated, and seemed like the perfect hideout for someone like Solano. We breached the door, and there he was, sitting at a small wooden table, completely calm, as though he had been expecting us. Solano didn't resist. In fact, he surrendered without a word. It was eerie, almost anticlimactic after the chaos that had surrounded the investigation. But we knew better than to relax. Solano was a dangerous man, and he had a plan. He always had a plan. As we cuffed him and began searching the cabin, we found more evidence, documents that not only tied him to Carter's murder, but also exposed a web of corruption that went far beyond what we had initially uncovered. Solano had been running a criminal empire from the shadows, and Carter had been just one piece of his operation. Back at the station, Solano was tight-lipped. He refused to cooperate, but we didn't need his confession. The evidence was overwhelming. We had the poison, the documents, and Daniel's testimony, all of which pointed to Solano as the mastermind behind Carter's death. But there was still one loose end, Lydia Carter. We had always suspected that Lydia was involved in her husband's murder, but we didn't have enough proof to charge her. That changed when we found a series of emails between her and Solano discussing Carter's downfall. It was clear that Lydia had been working with Solano from the beginning. She had wanted out of her marriage, and Solano had given her a way out. With this new information, we brought Lydia in for questioning. She tried to play the grieving widow, but the evidence was too strong. Faced with the emails and her connection to Solano, she finally cracked. She admitted to her role in the plot, revealing that she had been complicit in her husband's murder, all for a hefty payout and the promise of freedom from an unhappy marriage. Lydia's confession was the final piece of the puzzle. She explained how Solano had orchestrated the entire plot, how he had provided the poison, how they had staged the scene to make it look like a natural death, and how they had planned to disappear after the insurance payout came through. It was a cold, calculated plan, and they had almost gotten away with it. With Lydia and Solano both in custody, the case was finally coming to a close. The media was in a frenzy, and the public was glued to every development. This was the kind of case that would be talked about for years, a twisted tale of betrayal, greed, and murder. But there was one final twist. As we prepared for the trial, a new piece of evidence surfaced, a recording that Solano had made of his final conversation with Carter. In the recording, Carter begged for his life, offering Solano more money, more power, anything to stay alive. But Solano was unmoved. His response was chilling. This isn't about money anymore. It's about control. The trial was a spectacle. The courtroom was packed with reporters, and the public was eager to see justice served. Solano remained stone-faced throughout the proceedings, never showing a hint of remorse. Lydia, on the other hand, broke down several times on the stand, her carefully constructed image crumbling before everyone's eyes. The prosecution laid out the case in meticulous detail, from the poisoned vial found in Carter's apartment to the offshore accounts used to launder money. Solano's criminal empire was laid bare, and there was no escaping the truth. The jury deliberated for less than a day before returning a guilty verdict. Solano was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lydia, while spared the death penalty, received a long prison sentence for her role in the conspiracy. Justice had been served, but the case left a lasting impact on everyone involved, including me. In the aftermath of the trial, my team and I took a step back to reflect on everything we had uncovered. This case had started as a simple murder investigation, but it had evolved into something much bigger, a fight against corruption, greed, and power. We had exposed a network of criminals who had been operating under the radar for years, and while it was satisfying to see them brought to justice, it was also a stark reminder of how fragile our society can be. The media eventually moved on to the next big story, but for those of us who worked the case, the memories lingered. We had seen the worst of humanity, the betrayals, the lies, the cold-blooded murder, and it had taken its toll. But through it all, we had never lost sight of our mission to find the truth and bring the guilty to justice. As I reflect on this case now, years later, I realize how much it taught me about the human condition. Greed, ambition, and power can drive people to do unimaginable things. Carter's death wasn't just the result of a single bad decision. It was the culmination of years of corruption and moral decay. His murder was a symptom of a much larger disease, one that infects not just individuals but entire systems. I think about Lydia, a woman who, on the surface, had everything: wealth, status, and a high-profile husband. But beneath the surface, she was trapped in a loveless marriage, consumed by her desire for freedom and financial security. And then there was Solano, a man who thrived on control, who saw people as pawns in his grand game of power. In the end, both of them lost everything. This case wasn't just about solving a murder. It was about exposing the truth, no matter how ugly it was. It was about holding people accountable, even when they think they're untouchable. And most importantly, it was about never giving up, even when the odds are stacked against you. To anyone listening, I hope this story serves as a reminder that justice doesn't always come easy. It requires hard work, dedication, and an unshakable belief in doing what's right. My team and I faced countless obstacles, but we never lost sight of our goal. In the end, we brought down not just one man, but an entire criminal empire. And that, to me, is the greatest victory of all. As I bring this story to a close, I want to leave you with a few final thoughts. The world we live in is complex, and sometimes the lines between right and wrong can blur. But one thing remains true: your actions have consequences. Whether you're in a position of power or just an ordinary person, the choices you make can have a lasting impact on the lives of others. My advice to all of you is this: stay true to your values. Don't let greed or ambition cloud your judgment. It's easy to get swept up in the pursuit of wealth, power, or control. But remember that integrity is worth more than any of those things. And finally, always keep your eyes open. Corruption can hide in the most unexpected places, and it's up to all of us to stand against it. Speak up when you see something wrong, and never be afraid to fight for what's right. In the end, justice will prevail, but only if we're willing to fight for it. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for more stories from behind closed cases.